Part 5. Objections considered. Firstly, it is objected that the New Testament contains no appointment of such provision. The answer to this objection is brief but most satisfactory. The Old Testament is of divine authority as well as the New, and as obligatory in its precepts for our direction in doctrine and practice as the New Testament, in everything except the peculiarities of the former dispensation. To provide for the maintenance of religion is peculiar to no administration of religion, but common to all. It is a moral principle which is in no ways affected by any change in its outward dispensation. The provision made for the Old Testament church is an example having all the force of a command, for the command, though given to the Jewish people, regarded a moral duty, and therefore not peculiar to them, but common to them and us. It is not necessary, then, that there should be any precept in the New Testament that which was given in a former dispensation continues in full force. The friends of a public provision for religion have a right to ask those who are opposed to it to furnish New Testament authority for the rescinding of the precept which was formerly given. Nothing short of this can affect the argument or form an objection to the duty of a national provision for religion. A merely positive appointment remains in force till it is abrogated. Does the New Testament contain any such rescinding act? Had it been only a positive appointment, if not rescinded, it would have remained in force. How much more being a moral duty? I am fully aware that it has been said that the support of the gospel by the individual members of the church under the New Testament is as much a positive institution as any of the ordinances of the gospel, and the 9th chapter of the first epistle to the Corinthians is referred to as proof. If this were so, Paul must have acted a very unkind and sinful part towards the Corinthians when he labored among them without receiving any support, as he tells us, 2 Corinthians 11, verse 9. Had it been so, Paul had no right to deprive the Corinthians of such a positive privilege. But the truth is that while Paul had the right, as he says, of living by his ministry among them, for reasons of Christian expediency he forgoes his claim, but he did them no injury which otherwise he must have done on the principle of the objection. This passage establishes the principle that the minister of the gospel should be rewarded for his spiritual labors by receiving of carnal things necessary for his external wants, but leaves undetermined by whom this shall be given, whether by individuals or the state. Secondly, national provision for religion is liable, it is said, to be abused. It is a settled principle that the abuse of anything is not a legitimate argument against its use. Were the objection omitted, it would destroy every principle of action. For what is it that the corruption of man has not abused or turned to purposes never designed? Men eat and drink to excess. Shall then the cravings of hunger and thirst not be gratified because food and drink are abused by excess? Civil government has often degenerated into despotism and cruel oppression. The sacred right of liberty has sometimes too degenerated into riot and licentiousness. Shall then government and liberty be repudiated? Every religion itself has been corrupted and abused to purposes of superstition and idolatry. It has been made the tool of priestly and kingly tyranny. Shall all religion then be dispensed with, because some, nay, many, have corrupted it? Steamboats and locomotive carriages are run on the Lord's day, and because they are thus abused, shall steam power be forever laid aside? The objection is unreasonable, because it urges not against the thing itself, but against some misapplication which the corruption of man may make of it. If it could be shown that national provision for religion is in itself an evil, such an objection would be valid. But that men to gratify their own passions make an evil use of it is no more an objection than the abuse of government is an objection to government, or the abuse of liberty an objection against liberty. I plead for no abuse of the principle. I plead for no particular national establishment of religion, but I plead for the principle itself. If any or all the national establishments existing are defective or imperfect, let them be reformed. If they are radically evil, let them be destroyed. But do not destroy the principle. Thirdly, the gospel was maintained in the first ages of Christianity without any public provision or countenance. This objection is much relied on, not only as an objection, but as an unanswerable argument against all national concern in favor of religion. Quote, God has preserved the church for ages without national aid, and what he has done he will do. If the question was whether God could preserve and build up the church irrespective of national aid, there would be, indeed could be, no dispute. He who created the universe and founded Zion could maintain her in the world without the aid of nations, and so he could irrespective of the aid of individual liberality. The head of the church is as little dependent on individuals for this as on nations. His omnipotence and independence is just as much illustrated in the preservation of the church, though she may receive pecuniary support from a nation, as if it were received from individuals. The objection is irrelevant. It puts the dispute on a false issue. The matter in controversy is not whether God can preserve the church with or without a national provision. This is conceded and never has been denied. If both nations and individuals neglect their duty in this matter, he can and will preserve the church. The question at issue is, has God made it the duty of nations to provide for the support of religion? And if it is their duty, the fact that God has preserved religion in the world while nations neglected their duty does not absolve them from their obligation. Were the argument for a national support of religion merely on the ground of expediency, even then the objection would not be valid. What though the church has been preserved and religion prospered without any countenance from the nations? Might it not have been for the interest of religion to have enjoyed such countenance? Is it not, however, a question of expediency, but one of positive duty, a duty which nations owe to the church, and which is not to be neglected because God in his providence will find some other way of supporting religion? The sin of nations is not the less on this account. Fourthly, it is objected that a religious establishment has a tendency to secularize the church. If this objection means that some churches are secularized in consequence of connection with civil society, this is only an instance of abuse which has already been answered. If the objection means that national establishments necessarily produce secularization of the church, I reply that this is a mere assertion and meet it with a simple denial. That the objection have force, it is necessary to show that this consequence is radically embraced in the principle. This will be found not only difficult, but impossible. Did the provision made by the Jewish Commonwealth secularize the church during the former dispensation? If it did not, the objection falls to the ground, because this shows that national provision may be made without any such consequent effect. To say that it did is to charge God with the evil implied in the objection. Quote, "Is not the church a spiritual society, a kingdom not of this world? Is it not a society composed of spiritual persons, men who believe the truth as it is in Jesus, etc.? Can civil authority either erect or maintain such a society as this? Can it add one member to it which Christ has not added, or bestow one benefit on it which Christ has not bestowed?" Unquote. Ecclesiastical Establishments Considered, pages 23 and 24. Doubtless the church is a spiritual society made up of spiritual persons placed under a spiritual government and regulated by spiritual laws. But what, I ask, have these questions to do with a national provision for religion? This, like all the arguments and objections on the same side of this subject, takes for granted what ought to be proved. Who denies the spirituality of the church? The most devoted friends of national establishments not only admit, but maintain the spirituality of the church as an essential part of her character. But the question made in the quotation takes for granted that the advocates of establishments of religion do not admit the spirituality of the church, or that such establishments in their very nature imply that the church is not a spiritual, but a mere secular society. Apart from this, is not evident that the question has no bearing on the subject. Might it not be made with equal propriety against the support of the church by individual liberality? Can individuals, quote, erect or maintain such a society as this, unquote? The warmest advocate of voluntarism will not say they can. The objection, then, is out of place. Is there more spirituality in the pecuniary support given to the church when it comes from individuals than when it comes from the whole community? If there is not, then I presume it will not be said that there is when the objection has nothing to do with the subject in dispute. Another opponent, Dr. Wardlaw, while urging in substance the same objection, without taking any notice of the fallacy which it contains, strives to make the objection consistent with the fact that a national establishment once existed, and that too with divine approbation, This fact stood in the way of the objection, but as he is determined to retain the latter, he disposes of the former in a most singular manner. He maintains the church was comparatively a world sanctuary during the former dispensation, but being now more spiritual, any such support from the commonwealth would be inconsistent with her spirituality.